I thought that we were going to look at one or two poems every time that I'm teaching, and I thought, what better poet to start such a series of than Haim Nahman Bialik, who is considered the foremost modern Hebrew poet. And obviously, we're having like until 6:15 ish, so can't do him justice. But I still want to like say like a few words. So he was born in 1873 in Russia. He settled in Tel Aviv in 1924, and he died in Vienna in 1934. Um, One of the reasons why he is considered the national Hebrew poet is because he used the language in new ways. The forms that he was writing in were actually still quite old or traditional, but the way he brought the language to life and used it in his poems was a new way. He also, when he was using biblical quotes, which he did a lot, he had a very good yeshiva education, so he really knew a lot. He wouldn't use them in like a way the Psalms do that in terms of um, supportive, positive statements, and rather he took them out of the context and used them often to express some sort of despair, I want to say, or sadness or pessimism, which is actually interesting that he would do that so often, because you might think the person who is considered the foremost Hebrew national Hebrew poet is a person, and who was also a Zionist, is going to be someone who is full of hope and optimism. And the fact is that a lot of people wanted that from him, wanted him to be that, but he actually wasn't. A lot of his poems, also the two, especially the first we're going to look at, and we're going to focus on the first one, on Levadi, expresses rather anything between disenchantment and sadness and grief and loss. And he struggled with this for a long time. One of the reasons why he was so pessimistic often and grieving was obviously because of the overall situation of European Jewry. One of his famous poems, In the City of Slaughter, was composed in 1904, just a year after the pogrom in Kishinev, and he has many others of that. But the other thing that really was dominant in his life was that he had this very intense religious education, and he lost the religion lost its meaning for him very early on, actually, in his life. And even though he never found his way back to it, but he stayed with it. And what definitely stayed with him was the grief about having lost that. And not only in his own life, but he saw how a lot of Jewry abandoned the faith, and how it didn't make meaning, wasn't meaningful to them. And another irony in a way is that when he settled in Palestine, he it didn't revive his creativity or his spirits in a positive way. It was rather that he was still tied to Europe in his spirits and in his moods and in his influence, obviously. And so he is the foremost modern Hebrew poet, but and maybe it is in the language, and it is also in our culture in some way, this balance between hope and disenchantment and pessimism. But he continued, and I think I chose this poem that I brought because it expresses so much of what I just said, and also because I won't always do this, but I'll try to have poems that in one way or the other make a reference to the parsha that we've either been in, which is in our case Vayera, or in a way foreshadow maybe the parsha that is coming. Both poems actually do this to some extent, and yes. I also want to apologize. The translation, especially of Levadi, isn't the best. I had seen one or two things that I didn't like, but only after sending the sheet, did I realize just how incomplete it actually is. So for those of you who have a good command of Hebrew, I suggest you look at the Hebrew. And I brought another translation that is not a poetic translation, but it's a content-based translation that might be interesting and actually quite interesting to just listen to. So what I'm going to do, before I read the poem, I want to bring your attention to what I think are three main themes or motives in this poem that I roughly call: one, loneliness; the second one would be pain and grief; and the other one is some sort of intimacy and tenderness. And as you either follow along on the not so great English translation or in the Hebrew, maybe keep those in mind, and if you find a line that speaks to one of them, we can talk about that when we're done. So I'm going to read this in the English, in the Hebrew. לבדי. כולם נשא הרוח, כולם סחב האור, שירה חדשה את בוקר, חייהם הרנינה, ואני גוזל רך, נשתכחתי מלב. I need to put this up. מלב, תחת כנפי השכינה. בדד נשארתי, והשכינה אף היא, כנב ימינה השבורה על ראשי הרעידה. ידע ליבי את ליבה, הרדה עליי, על בנה, על יחידה. קווה נתגרשה מכל הזוויות, רק עוד פינת סתר שוממה וקטנה נשארה, בית המדרש, ותתכס בצל, והיא עמה יחד בצרה. וכשקלה לבבי לחלון לאור, וכשצר לי המקום מתחת לכנפה, כבשה ראשה בכתפי, ודמעתה על דף גמרתי נטפה. חרש בכתה עליי, ותתרפק עליי, וכמו שחה בכנפה השבורה בעדי. כולם נשא הרוח, כולם פרחו להם, ויוותר לבדי. ובכן סיום של קינה עתיקה מאוד, וכאין תפילה, בקשה וחרדה כאחד. שמעה אוזני בביחה החרישית ההיא, ובדמעה ההיא הרוחתה. I am going to read what this book, which is amazing if you don't know it yet. It's a wonderful reader with a great collection of modern Hebrew poetry. It is called The Modern Hebrew Poem Itself, so it's fantastic. I'm going to just quickly read what they write in English. Alone. The wind carried all of them away. The light swept all of them away. A new song made the morning of their lives exult with song. And I, a soft fledgling, was completely forgotten under the wings of the Shekhinah. Solitary, solitary I remained, and the Shekhinah too. She fluttered her broken right wing over my head. My heart knew her heart. She trembled with anxiety over me, over her son, over her only son. She has already been driven away from every corner. Only one hidden nook, desolate and small, remained, the house of study, and she covered herself with the shadow, and I was together with her, sharing in the distress. And when my heart yearned for the window, for the light, and when the place under her wing was too narrow for me, she hid her head in my shoulder, and her tear dropped on my Talmud page. Silently she wept over me and enfolded me, as though shielding me with her broken wing. The wind carried them all away, They have all flown off, and I was left alone, alone. And something akin to the ending of a very ancient lamentation, and something akin to a prayer, a supplication and trembling, my ear heard in that silent weeping and in that tear boiling. So I mean, there's one could talk about this forever. It's like I think it's really full with a lot of the themes that I mentioned, and I've been talking and reading a lot. So I have some things to share, of course, but I would like to open it up first. If anybody, what comes up for you when we have these three themes of loneliness and grief and pain and intimacy? Anybody wants to say something? Yes. The Shekhinah. Yeah. Do people hear what people say in the audience? So there was this mention in the room. What's your name? Marshall said that that a lot of this, there are a lot of references to the Haskalah, to the Enlightenment movement, and that a lot of the yeshiva students have left, and the Beit Midrash is empty, and only the speaker is there together with God, with the Shekhinah. And from how you say it, I understand that you see it. That's positive. You were saying that's a good. It seemed to describe to you like a good thing. Yeah. So yes, so definitely. So Marshall was like saying, oh, the focus is also that Bialik is not throwing everything out. It's just that he is still making use of the values and turning it into literature, which I totally agree with, which is what he's doing in so many of his poems. I think he never left, he never walked away from the religion, and wrote completely secular poems that had no reference at all to Judaism. I think he needed probably to stay with it. And I think I see it is a beautiful intimate moment, and that is definitely what is going on here in terms of tenderness and intimacy. But it is very sad. It's especially the fourth and fifth stanzas, if you want to take a look at it, how he's describing how he feels that this place is very narrow, is too narrow for him, and and he wants to go to the window. He wants to go to the light, the enlightenment, and this place is too narrow for him. And then the Shekhinah is is hiding her head on his shoulder and crying, and her tear falls on his Gemara page. And for me, it was just almost like a union of lovers who know that they have to part, and even the person who is the one who wants to walk away feels the grief, which is the speaker. But it's this like super intimate moment, but it doesn't it it doesn't become a good moment in that. It is good because there's intimacy, but it is very sad because he's not going to stay, and they are not coming back. But yes, thank you for reading up on it in advance. That's yeah. Thank you. Yes. There is a hand up on Zoom. How do I do this? What? Okay, the hand on Zoom. I'm being told. I'm sorry, I won't be able to hear you. So, right, we have to. But yeah, no, for sure. So there was this comment. What's your name? David was commenting on how the search for spirituality in the loneliness caused by trauma is not unusual, and how we find it a lot, and definitely that is there. And it is interesting though also that both figures are lonely, right? So it is the speaker is lonely. The speaker is the one who is saying badad badad, and the levadi is actually when the Shekhinah is speaking. So there's a lot of loneliness and trying to seek and connect. Deborah. Yes, 1902. Presumably, yeah. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Everyone is gone, and the Shekhinah is alone in the Bet Midrash. I think he died while he was. I don't think he left. I think he died on a visit when he like yeah. I think yes, which is I think what his grief. What I find is that it's the loneliness of the Shekhinah is actually bigger in a way than I mean than the speakers, right? Because the speaker is like as I've been thinking about this a lot about in terms of of a separation where even the person who says who has made the decision to leave that they still feel a lot of pain um, and pain and empathy but mostly also grief and pain for that it's over and in this poem though even though he obviously then left but the poem it doesn't end it doesn't say and I left like I was reading when I was reading here what Tuvia Rubna writes about it is sort of undecided it's still open the way the poem ends yeah Rabbi Schatz. Oh yes. Yeah, that's amazing. So Rabbi Schatz was commenting, for those of you on Zoom, that of all the words that could have been used for God, the one name is Shekhinah that is always used as a partner to something, to God. It's always in partnership, whereas all the other words stand by themselves. So that does speak to the intimacy and tenderness, for sure. And Deborah earlier was mentioning about that he also left ultimately, that there is still this vacillation of being there, but then also leaving. Yes. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. Also, to that, the ancient lament and the Shekhinah, what I found interesting is that there's this word that the only corner, like she's been like driven away from every corner, and she only found this one little hidden nook in the Ben Midrash, and it resonated, it echoes the four corners of the exile. That even from there she's been driven away, and now she's alone in the Ben Midrash. We are basically at 6:15. I do want to so two things that I think. First of all, thank you everyone. I would love to continue talking with you about it. There's so much more to say, and each of you has brought a new aspect that I didn't think of it, so it's amazing. I just wanted to point out, which is probably didn't go unnoticed, why I chose this poem. I mean, I chose this poem because I like it, but also because it just fits in so well with our parsha. Because there's this reference, "Your only son," is there, and there are two other references. One is to Isaiah 49:20, is about this place is too narrow for me. When he says that, which is about that once redemption has come, the place is going to be too narrow. It's meant in a positive way, whereas Bialik turns it, at least the way I understand it, into something that feels restrained, which I interpreted it to be the religion, and then the other line is I will be with her in her trouble, echoes a line from Psalms. And it is interesting that the Tsarli is both trouble and narrow. So this is all used. The other thing, we're obviously not going to look at the second poem, but that was just brought as like a continuation of this because of two things. Because if we understand this being a union between the speaker and the Shekhinah that is being painfully dissolved, it is interesting to look at the other poem, which is really more of a love poem than a poem about spiritual quest or religious quests and inquiry. And obviously it is so often used in Jewish imagery and in biblical texts throughout. The wings of the Shekhinah, the shelter of God, and it's often used to express romantic union. So that I thought interesting also because it foreshadows Chaye Sarah, at least if we want to read it into it. Of course, he wasn't thinking of that, but because he's asking, be my mother, be to me like my mother and my sister. So he's speaking to the woman that he loves, and I thought it's a nice way to go into the week, thinking that in this parsha that is beginning very soon, Rivka is found and brought to Isaac and goes into the tent of Sarah, and then she's his mother and his sister. Steve has the last word. Pardon? Oh, wonderful. So there's an Arik Einstein song, as there are so many amazing Arik Einstein songs, that makes reference to Tachat Kanfea, under the wing of the Shekhinah. And it's easy to find, says Steve. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.